to have Paul in our studios, Lisa, is great. And of course, the reason we booked this is I went back to Amy and I said, who had the worst call to Memorial Day? And Amy, you know, she didn't even have to look at the surveillance. She didn't even look at the surveillance Rolodex. Folks, this is what it's about. Okay, Sankey has to go from $78 to $100 a barrel, and he's got like 3 or 8 days to do it.
And Paul Sankey is walking out right now, and he's not going to be joining us anymore. No, I'm kidding. Paul, thank you so much for joining us. You and everybody else, let's be honest. A lot of people thought that oil prices were going to go a lot higher, and here we are at $74 a barrel on WTI from a high of 122 if you go back to June of last year.
Right.
What's been the main disrupting feature here?
Yeah, I mean, if you look back at your chart there, we hit a low of 71 in December 22. We got all the way down to 71, and we really haven't done anything since that. And so there were 3 things, basically. Winter came in warm. You know, we couldn't call that. It's probably smart to call for warmer winters, but there was always the shot. And we certainly had a very cold late December, so it looked like it could be a big deal. It wasn't. The second thing is clearly that Russia has continued to export oil. So while Russia production may be down, the exports have kept coming, and I think they will, actually, as long as the Russians can maintain the exports, they will. So production could be falling, but we could still see relatively high, much higher than expected Russian oil exports. And then finally, China, as you know, the recovery has been service-led. So there's been weakness, relative weakness. I mean, it's growing, but not growing much in the industrial side of the economy. And the jet fuel side of the China argument has worked, but the industrial side hasn't really showed up. So those are the big things. And then just to throw in there that the SPR has become irrelevant. So that's been a bit of a help. You know, we haven't had the million barrel a day drawdown that we had last year at times, but it's become a non-event because the rebuild that they've talked about is relatively tiny.
And it's going to begin later. I don't think it's even begun yet, right? I believe it's going to start in August. Yeah. We're looking right now also, though, at a scenario where Saudi Arabia is getting a little concerned about how low prices are, right? And they're starting to push back a little bit in the idea of OPEC maybe challenging pricing where it is with another production cut. How much does that factor into your calculus?
Well, they've been crying wolf a bit, right? I mean, this is the 3rd time that they've tried to squeeze speculators. And frankly, I don't know why they're so obsessed with speculators. I mean, you can squeeze speculators on a short-term basis, but the real problem is the overall oil balance, right? Speculation waxes and wanes. It's not a fundamental argument. So while speculation is very low, extremely low right now in terms of speculative longs, you see the Saudi oil minister coming out this week saying we're going to squeeze you again. The real issue is, can the Saudis corral Russia? And Russia's a threat to Saudi, right? Because what Russia's doing is it's sending its oil to Asia, and it's cutting the traditional long-term Saudi premium for selling oil to Asia. So there's a much bigger deal than people appreciate between Russia and Saudi here in terms of market share and competition. And that's an awkward conversation because while we know that there's a good relationship between MBS, last time we checked, and Putin, it's not so obvious there's a good relationship between the Russian oil minister and the Saudi oil minister at all. So we'll see how this plays out because, as you know, next week we have an OPEC meeting. What they say, and I was in the room in Vienna in October when they announced the 2 million barrel a day cut, everyone was agape that you would be cutting at such a time, and guys like me were calling for $120 oil by Memorial Day. Those cuts never showed up. They never showed up from Russia. They never showed up from Saudi.
I want to go domestic with you here, and I'm going to think of Ben Dell at Sanford Bernstein while you and Adam were working at Deutsche Bank on the cost of getting the barrel out of the ground. Now, you say it's $50 to deliver a barrel right now, the lifting cost. It's just there's a certain expense to getting this done. And I want to bring it over to an actual oil company, say Occidental Petroleum, which I believe you've got an affinity for. I am thunderstruck how they've not deployed their burgeoning free cash flow to shareholders. Am I wrong on that?
Well, they've got to pay down debt first, right? I mean, Oxy's just had a higher debt burden, but the free cash flow has been going to debt pay down. But you've seen other companies probably over-return. I mean, we've had companies, the major E&Ps such as Devon and Pioneer, have paid specials through the peak environment. Is that a new permanent
fixture? Are they like the airline industry where they finally have permanent religion?
I believe they do. I believe they do now realize. And I was actually with the CEO of Valero yesterday, and, you know, that industry changed. You know, that industry used to spend money for growth. We were mocking him for the previous CEO's spending acquisition tendency. Bill Clessy in charge of Valero. Joe Gorder came in at Valero and pretty much doubled the dividend immediately and has maintained a very high cash return strategy. So we've seen the refiners
Right.
change and then maintain. And it took a long time. It took another decade until really COVID before the US E&Ps got the memo, and I now think they've
Right.
got it. They would have to be stupid to change
Well,
tack
they've been
because it's
stupid
going to kill them.
before. I mean, there's been, I look at the drilling, and you wonder where they deployed all that capital to. Help me with Europe versus U.S. big oil. Which is the best 3 to 5 year total return?
The problem with European oils is that naturally European investors are overweight European oils, so they can't move those stocks. Everyone in the UK, Europe has as much oil as they want, so you need US buyers of those stocks in order to make them work. And US buyers, I can't persuade US buyers to buy US oils right now. And of course, you have a tremendous range of US oils. You can buy Schlumberger, you can buy Valero, you can buy Exxon. Why would you then go outside your benchmark and buy a company with an awful track record, such as some of these do, in terms of their capital discipline? Now, there's a very interesting thing coming up, which people are talking a lot about, which is Shell is having a solo analyst meeting here in New York, which is notable. You would expect them maybe to do a Europe-US meeting, but June the 14th, we'll get the new CEO of Shell, and he can transform the performance of Shell if he gets it right. I want them to split the company. I want them to make a Shell LNG, a Shell downstream, a Shell deep water, and release value. And so does a major activist. Third Point has been out publicly saying that they would want to see the same thing. So there's the potential for them to make strategy changes. In the case of BP, they're in a U-turn situation, right? They overcooked it on going down the renewables route, which I was just talking to Alex about what a huge mistake that was in terms of misunderstanding the cost of capital. But ultimately, I think over time, the U.S. investors, if they come back to oil in a strong oil environment, will have a tendency to buy the E&Ps and U.S. companies first. So the answer is Tom, U.S.
Just real quick here. Why are OPEC Plus meetings so short?
Well, if you remember, at the point of the maximum crisis, the meeting lasted a week, right? In March.
All right, fair
March
enough.
2020.
Is this one next week? Just quickly, is it going to last 8 minutes or 11 minutes?
I think they'll probably prearrange. I think Saudi does want to squeeze the speculators, so I think you want to be long here, oil. I just don't know how long it's going to last. I mean, that's more like a week or two trade, which is what we saw out of the last Saudi announcement. And then I think we'll probably be going back to worrying about the economy.